In the Golden Age of ancient Egypt, during the prosperous New Kingdom period around 1350 BCE, no creature held a more revered place in daily life than the cat. These graceful beings were far more than mere pets. They were living embodiments of the divine sacred guardians blessed by the gods themselves, and cherished members of Egyptian households across all social classes. The ancient Egyptians believed cats possessed supernatural powers that connected the earthly realm to the divine. They served as protectors against evil spirits, guardians of precious grain stores, and living symbols of the goddess Bastet, who represented protection, fertility, and the nurturing aspects of motherhood. From the grandest palaces of pharaohs to the modest homes of farmers, cats were honored, protected, and deeply loved. This sacred relationship between humans and felines created one of history's most remarkable cultural bonds. Egyptian law protected cats with severe penalties for harming them. Families mourned their feline companions with elaborate rituals, and the practice of cat mummification ensured these beloved creatures would accompany their human families into the afterlife. The reverence for cats permeated every aspect of Egyptian society, influencing art, religion, daily customs, and social traditions that would echo through millennia. Now, lie down and listen as we journey back over 3,000 years to experience a single, extraordinary day in the life of an Egyptian family and their sacred feline companions, Meet and Tekem, in the bustling city of Memphis, along the life-giving Nile River. The first pale fingers of Ra's light crept across the eastern horizon, painting the muddy waters of the Nile in shimmering gold and amber. In the comfortable mud-brick home of Kemwaset, a respected scribe in the temple complex of Ptah, the household was beginning to stir with the gentle rhythm that had governed Egyptian mornings for countless generations. Meet, a sleek black cat with emerald eyes that seemed to hold the mysteries of the afterlife, had positioned herself perfectly on the limestone windowsill that faced the sacred river. Her obsidian coat absorbed the early morning warmth, while her alert gaze tracked the movements of ibises and herons fishing in the shallows. The ancient Egyptians believed that cats could see into the spirit world, and watching Meet's intense focus on the invisible currents of air and shadow, it was easy to understand why. Her ears, adorned with tiny copper rings that clinked softly when she moved, twitched at sounds only she could perceive. Beside the sleeping alcove, where young Amenhotep lay on his woven reed mat, Tekem stretched with the fluid grace that had inspired countless Egyptian artists. Her tawny coat, marked with the intricate tabby patterns that Egyptians called the sacred markings of Ra, caught the morning light as she extended each limb in the ritualistic stretching that cats performed to honor the sun god's daily rebirth. The gold and copper collar around her neck, inscribed with protective hieroglyphs and bearing a small amulet of Bastet, glinted as she moved. The walls of the sleeping chamber were decorated with vibrant paintings depicting cats in various sacred poses, hunting in the afterlife marshes, sitting beside the thrones of gods, and protecting households from serpents and scorpions. These weren't merely decorative choices, but powerful talismans that reinforced the spiritual protection the living cats provided. As Amenhotep's eyes opened to greet the new day, he was immediately aware of Tekem's warm presence beside him. The young man, apprenticed to his father in the noble art of hieroglyphic writing, had grown up understanding that his feline companions were far more than household animals. They were sacred guardians, divine messengers, and beloved family members whose well-being was intrinsically linked to his family's fortune and spiritual protection. The morning air carried the complex scents of the Nile River mud, rich with life, blooming lotus flowers, and the distant aroma of bread baking in countless household ovens throughout Memphis. Meat's whiskers twitched as she detected these familiar fragrances alongside others that human senses couldn't perceive. The musk of small mammals stirring in hidden burrows, the metallic scent of fish scales glinting beneath the water's surface, and the mysterious spiritual essences that cats were believed to navigate as easily as the physical world. Through the wooden lattice window came the gentle sounds of Memphis awakening, the splash of washerwomen beginning their work at the river's edge, the melodic calls of water sellers preparing their daily rounds, the rhythmic slapping of sandals on packed earth pathways, and the distant chanting of priests performing dawn rituals at the great temple complex. These sounds created a comforting symphony that had marked the beginning of days in this ancient city for over 1,000 years. Tekem's purring began as a low, almost inaudible rumble that seemed to harmonize with the cosmic vibrations Egyptians believed connected all living things to the divine order. This purring was considered a form of prayer, a sacred vibration that maintained the balance between chaos and order that was so crucial to Egyptian cosmology. As Amenhotep reached out to stroke her soft fur, he felt the deep contentment that came from knowing he was under divine protection. The room gradually filled with the golden light that Egyptians associated with divine blessing. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams like tiny spirits, and both cats turned their faces toward the light source with an instinctive reverence that their human family interpreted as worship of Ra's daily resurrection. This moment of quiet contemplation before the household's activities began was considered sacred time, when the boundary between the earthly and divine realms was thinnest. From the courtyard below came the gentle lowing of the family's cow and the soft bleating of goats, animals that served practical purposes but commanded none of the spiritual reverence accorded to cats. The family's servants were already beginning their morning tasks, but they moved quietly during these early moments, respecting the sacred nature of dawn and the need for the household cats to complete their morning spiritual observations. Amenhotep slowly sat up on his sleeping mat, careful not to disturb Tekem's meditation, while observing Meat's continued vigil at the window. Both cats seemed to be communing with forces beyond human perception, their ears rotating to catch sounds from the spirit world, their whiskers sensing changes in the invisible currents of divine energy that flowed through all creation. The peaceful domesticity of this moment embodied the perfect harmony that Egyptians sought between practical daily life and spiritual devotion. Here, in this simple bedroom, with its painted walls and reed mats, the sacred and mundane coexisted naturally, with cats serving as the living bridge between human concerns and divine protection. As the sun climbed higher and its light grew stronger, both cats began to shift from their meditative poses, signaling that the sacred dawn observations were complete and the active day could begin. Their movement was the household's cue that the time for contemplative quiet was ending and the time for purposeful activity was beginning. The morning ritual of caring for sacred cats was as elaborate and meaningful as any religious ceremony performed in Egypt's grandest temples. As Amenhotep rose from his sleeping mat, he could hear his mother, Nefertari, already beginning the daily offerings to their feline guardians in the central courtyard below. The sound of water being poured into copper bowls and the gentle clinking of ceramic vessels created a percussion that announced the beginning of the cat's morning devotions. Meat descended from her windowsill perch with the silent grace that had earned cats their reputation as masters of stealth. Her paws made no sound on the painted limestone floor as she padded toward the wooden stairs leading to the courtyard. Egyptian homes were designed with cats in mind. The stairs were built with lower risers to accommodate feline companions, and small alcoves were carved into walls to provide perfect resting spots throughout the house. The family's water came from a deep well connected to the Nile through carefully engineered channels that filtered the sacred river water through layers of sand and charcoal. For the cats, this water was served in special copper bowls inscribed with hieroglyphic prayers to Bastet and decorated with images of cats hunting in the afterlife marshes. The bowls themselves were considered sacred objects, passed down through generations and polished daily until they gleamed like mirrors reflecting divine light. Nefertari had already prepared the morning feast for Meet and Tekem, an elaborate meal that demonstrated the family's devotion and prosperity. Fresh Nile perch, caught before dawn by fishermen who understood the spiritual significance of providing for sacred cats, lay arranged on small limestone platters. The fish had been carefully cleaned and filleted, with the bones removed to prevent any harm to the precious felines. Alongside the fish were portions of duck meat, still warm from the cooking fires, cut into delicate pieces perfect for cats' smaller mouths. The grain cakes prepared specially for cats were a marvel of ancient Egyptian culinary art, made from emmer wheat ground to finest powder and mixed with honey, goose fat, and herbs sacred to Bastet. These cakes provided essential nutrition while honouring the cat's divine nature. The dough was shaped into small fish and bird forms before baking, creating both nourishment and entertainment for the feline recipients. Some households added powdered lotus petals or frankincense to these cakes, believing these ingredients enhanced the cat's spiritual awareness. As Meet and Tekem approached their morning meal, they performed what the family interpreted as a prayer ritual. Both cats sat perfectly still before their food bowls, their golden eyes focused intently on the offerings, while their whiskers twitched in appreciation of the aromatic feast. This moment of contemplation before eating was seen as gratitude to the gods who provided abundance and to the humans who served as intermediaries in delivering divine sustenance. The cat's eating habits were observed and interpreted for spiritual significance. When Meet ate her fish first, it was seen as a sign that water-based enterprises would be favoured that day. When Tekem chose the duck meat initially, it suggested that air and wind would be auspicious. Every aspect of their behaviour was laden with meaning in a culture that saw divine messages in the flight patterns of birds, the flooding of the Nile, and the movements of sacred animals. While the cats enjoyed their breakfast, Amenhotep carefully cleaned their sleeping areas, shaking out the linen cushions stuffed with soft papyrus fibres and replacing the small reed mats that served as their personal territories. These mats were woven by skilled craftswomen who incorporated protective symbols into the pattern's images of Ankh symbols for life, jade pillars for stability, and was scepters for divine power. The grooming ritual that followed breakfast was perhaps the most spiritually significant part of the morning routine. Meet began her ablutions with methodical precision, her rough tongue cleaning each pore with deliberate care. Egyptians believed this grooming was a form of prayer, with each lick representing a petition to Bastet for protection and blessing. The family watched respectfully as Meet cleaned behind her ears, smoothed her whiskers, and polished her coat until it shone like polished obsidian. Tekem's grooming style was different, but equally sacred. She performed what appeared to be a ritualistic dance, contorting her supple body into positions that seemed to mirror the ceremonial poses depicted in temple reliefs. When she cleaned her back legs by bringing them forward in impossible flexibility, Nefertari whispered prayers of gratitude for the cat's continued health and presence in their lives. The morning light streaming through the courtyard's open roof illuminated particles of dust that danced around the cats like tiny spirits. This interplay of light and shadow, with cats moving gracefully through geometric patterns of illumination, created scenes that inspired the artistic traditions that would make Egyptian cat art legendary throughout the ancient world. Fresh herbs were scattered around the cat's eating area mint to aid digestion, small amounts of valerian root to enhance their hunting instincts, and dried lotus petals to strengthen their connection to the divine realm. These additions to their environment were based on generations of accumulated knowledge about feline health and spiritual well-being, knowledge that was carefully preserved and passed down through families like precious heirlooms. As the morning feeding ritual concluded, both cats seemed to enter a state of peaceful contentment that the family interpreted as spiritual satisfaction. Their half-closed eyes and gentle purring created an atmosphere of divine blessing that would protect the household throughout the day ahead. The household duties that occupied the morning hours provided ample opportunity for Meat and Tecum to demonstrate the sacred hunting prowess that had originally earned cats their revered status in Egyptian society. As Amenhotep helped his mother organize the family's precious grain stores in the cool underground chambers beneath their home, the cats assumed their roles as divine protectors of the family's most vital resources. The granary chambers were marvels of ancient engineering, lined with smooth limestone to prevent climbing pests and designed with narrow openings that cats could navigate easily while keeping larger predators at bay. Clay vessels, each capable of holding enough grain to feed the family for a month, were arranged in precise rows according to religious principles. Emma wheat occupied the vessels closest to the east wall to honor Ra's daily journey, while barley was stored along the north wall under the protection of the goddess Neith. Techem had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect the presence of unwanted creatures in these sacred storage spaces. Her ears would swivel like small satellite dishes, pinpointing sounds that human ears couldn't perceive. The scratching of tiny claws against clay, the whispered movement of serpents through gaps in the stonework, or the nearly silent breathing of rats hidden behind grain vessels. When she detected such intrusions, her entire body would transform from relaxed companion to focused predator in an instant. The morning's excitement began when Tekem's posture suddenly changed from casual observation to intense alertness. Her pupils dilated to absorb maximum visual information. Her whiskers stretched forward to sense minute air currents, and her tail began the slow, hypnotic swaying that preceded a hunt. Amenhotep and his mother immediately recognized these signs and stepped back to give the sacred hunter room to perform her divine duty. What happened next unfolded with the precision of a religious ceremony. A cobra, its hood expanded in warning and its venomous fangs glistening with deadly poison, had somehow entered the granary through a crack in the limestone foundation. The serpent represented everything that Egyptians feared: chaos, destruction, and the constant threat of evil forces attempting to corrupt the ordered world that the gods had created. Tekem's approach to the cobra was a masterpiece of feline strategy and divine intervention. She moved in a wide circle around the serpent, her paws making no sound on the smooth stone floor, while maintaining perfect eye contact with her dangerous opponent. Her copper collar caught the lamplight, creating flashes of divine radiance that seemed to confuse and mesmerize the snake. Every movement was calculated, graceful, and filled with the deadly efficiency that had made cats legendary throughout Egypt. The cobra struck with lightning speed, its fangs targeting where Tekem's head had been a split second earlier. But the cat seemed to anticipate the attack with supernatural awareness, flowing like liquid shadow away from the serpent's reach, while simultaneously positioning herself for a counterattack. Her reflexes were so fast that they appeared to bend the normal rules of time and space, lending credence to the Egyptian belief that cats existed partially in the spirit world. When Tekem finally struck, it was with the swift precision of divine justice. Her powerful jaws clamped down on the cobra's neck just behind the head, applying exactly the right pressure to deliver instant death while avoiding the venomous fangs. The entire encounter lasted less than 30 seconds, but it reinforced every Egyptian belief about cats' supernatural protective powers and their role as guardians against the forces of chaos. Amenhotep and Nefertari watched this display with a mixture of gratitude, awe, and religious reverence. They understood that they had witnessed not merely a practical pest control event, but a sacred ritual in which their guardian cat had battled the forces of chaos on behalf of their household. The dead cobra would be carefully disposed of with proper rituals, while Tekem would receive special honours for her protective service. Meanwhile, Meat had been conducting her own patrol of the family's storage areas, moving through spaces too small for humans to access, and inspecting corners where threats might hide. Her presence alone seemed to deter rodents, as if her sacred aura created an invisible barrier that vermin dared not cross. She paused periodically to mark certain spots with her scent, establishing territorial boundaries that served both practical and spiritual purposes. The servants who worked in the household understood the sacred nature of the cat's protective duties and took care never to interfere with their hunting activities. When a cat was stalking prey, all human activity in the area would cease until the hunt was complete. This wasn't merely practical consideration, but religious obligation. Interrupting a cat's sacred hunt could bring divine displeasure and leave the household vulnerable to spiritual attack. The grain vessels themselves bore painted images of cats in hunting poses, artistic representations that were believed to enhance the protection provided by the living cats. These decorations showed cats catching snakes, pouncing on rats, and standing guard over abundance, serving as permanent reminders of the feline guardian's sacred duties, even when the cats themselves were resting or engaged in other activities. After completing their morning patrol, both cats performed elaborate cleaning rituals that served to remove any spiritual contamination they might have encountered while battling the forces of chaos. This grooming was particularly thorough after hunting, as Egyptians believed that contact with creatures of disorder required purification to maintain the cat's sacred status and protective powers. The family's bread-making activities provided another opportunity to observe the cat's integration into daily spiritual life. As Nefertari kneaded dough that would become the day's bread, Meat and Tekem positioned themselves strategically around the work area, not begging for food, but maintaining their protective vigil over the family's sustenance. Their presence was believed to bless the bread with divine protection against spoilage and contamination. The morning's events had already demonstrated the essential truth that every Egyptian household understood. Cats were not pets in the modern sense, but sacred partners in the eternal struggle between order and chaos, light and darkness, life and death. Their presence in the home was a continuous blessing that required careful attention, proper care, and constant gratitude to maintain the divine protection they provided. The bustling Memphis marketplace at midday was a kaleidoscope of sights, sounds, and scents that revealed the complex social hierarchies of ancient Egyptian society. Hierarchies that extended even to the sacred cats who accompanied their human families through the crowded bazaars. As Amenhotep walked beside his mother Nefertari through the maze of merchant stalls, reed awnings, and colourful displays, he observed how the reverence for cats manifested differently across the social spectrum. The marketplace itself was a testament to Egypt's prosperity and international connections. Merchants offered goods from across the known world: ivory from Nubia, cedar wood from Lebanon, lapis lazuli from distant Afghanistan, and exotic spices from mysterious lands beyond the Red Sea. The air was thick with incense burning at small shrines dedicated to Thoth, the god of commerce, while the complex aromas of roasting meats, fresh bread, ripening fruits, and exotic perfumes created an intoxicating atmosphere that seemed to pulse with life and possibility. Near the marketplace's most prestigious section, where merchants sold goods fit for noble households, Amenhotep witnessed a procession that perfectly illustrated how cat worship varied among social classes. A nobleman's entourage moved through the crowd with ceremonial dignity, and at its centre was a sight that took his breath away: a magnificent silver-spotted cat being carried in a palanquin that rivaled those used for human royalty. The cat's carrier was a masterpiece of Egyptian craftsmanship, carved from precious sycamore wood and inlaid with gold leaf that formed intricate patterns of lotus flowers and protective symbols. Silk cushions dyed with expensive purple and crimson pigments provided luxurious comfort, while gauze curtains offered protection from dust and sun while maintaining visibility. The cat itself wore a collar that was essentially a piece of jewellery fit for Pharaoh's court. Thick bands of gold, set with emeralds, carnelian, and turquoise, each stone chosen for its protective magical properties. 4 servants attended this feline nobility, each with specific duties that had been refined over generations of noble cat care. One carried a large fan made from ostrich feathers to ensure the cat remained cool. Another bore an ornate water vessel crafted from silver and decorated with reliefs depicting Bastet's various sacred forms. A third servant carried an elaborate food chest containing delicacies that most humans could only dream of tasting: preserved duck liver, honey, glazed quail eggs, and small fish that had been marinated in expensive oils and spices. The fourth servant was perhaps the most important, a trained observer whose sole responsibility was to interpret the cat's behaviour for spiritual significance. When the noble cat turned its head toward a particular merchant's stall, this movement was analysed for divine messages about future business ventures. If the cat showed interest in specific goods, it was interpreted as divine endorsement. The servant carried a papyrus scroll where he recorded every significant gesture, expression, and behaviour for later consultation by the nobleman's household priests. In stark contrast, Amenhotep observed a poor farming family whose cat demonstrated that divine reverence transcended economic circumstances. Their cat was a scrappy, battle-scarred Tom who had clearly lived a harder life than the pampered noble feline, yet he was treated with the same fundamental respect and spiritual recognition. The farmer's wife offered her cat small pieces of dried fish and grain cakes that represented a significant portion of the family's limited resources. Her copper bracelet, likely her most valuable possession, had been traded for a simple clay amulet of Bastet that hung from the cat's worn leather collar. This poor family's cat roamed freely through the marketplace, confident in his sacred status despite his humble appearance. Merchants who wouldn't spare a glance for the poor family members would carefully step aside for their cat, offering small pieces of food and gentle words of respect. The universal reverence for cats created a form of social equality that transcended normal class boundaries. While human social status varied dramatically, all cats were equally sacred in the eyes of gods and mortals alike. Between these extremes, Amenhotep's middle-class family represented the mainstream of Egyptian cat worship. Meet and Tekem wore copper collars inscribed with protective hieroglyphs, not as elaborate as noble cats' gold and jewelled accessories, but far more substantial than the simple clay amulets worn by poor families' cats. Their daily diet included fresh fish, good quality meat, and specially prepared grain cakes, though not the exotic delicacies reserved for the wealthiest households. The marketplace offered numerous services specifically for cats across all social levels. Professional cat groomers worked under reed awnings, their services ranging from simple brushing and claw trimming for commoner cats to elaborate beauty treatments for noble felines that included application of kohl around the eyes, oiling of the coat with precious unguents, and even the attachment of decorative gold leaf to whiskers for special ceremonies. Cat food vendors occupied their own section of the marketplace, offering everything from basic dried fish scraps for poor families to exotic preserved delicacies for wealthy households. One merchant specialized in sacred grain cakes, displaying dozens of varieties shaped like different animals and inscribed with hieroglyphic prayers. Another vendor offered live birds in small cages, not for human consumption, but as hunting practice for pampered noble cats who needed to maintain their predatory skills despite luxurious lifestyles. The differences in treatment were striking, yet all occurred within a framework of universal reverence. Noble cats received individual attention from multiple servants, their every need anticipated and fulfilled before they could even express desire. They rode in comfort while surveying their domain like small furry pharaohs, their elevated position both literal and metaphorical. Middle-class cats, like Meat and Tekem, walked freely, but wore visible symbols of their sacred status, receiving respectful treatment from all social classes. Poor families' cats might lack material luxuries, but they received the same fundamental respect and spiritual recognition as their wealthier counterparts. The marketplace also revealed how cats served as social bridges between different classes. When a noble cat showed interest in a poor merchant's wares, it created opportunities for social interaction that would otherwise never occur. Merchants of all backgrounds shared stories about their cat's remarkable behaviors, creating bonds of common experience that transcended normal social barriers. Professional cat interpreters moved through the marketplace, offering their services to read the spiritual significance of feline behaviors. These specialists could identify subtle signs that indicated divine favor or warning, helping cat owners understand messages from the gods delivered through their sacred companions. Their services were available to all social classes, though wealthy families could afford more detailed consultations and written reports. As the morning progressed toward noon, the intensity of marketplace activity increased. But the reverence for cats remained constant across all social boundaries, creating a remarkable demonstration of how deeply spiritual beliefs could unite diverse communities in common purpose and respect. The afternoon journey to the local shrine of Bastet revealed layers of religious hierarchy and spiritual significance that made the marketplace's social distinctions seem simple by comparison. As Amenhotep's family approached the sacred precinct, the very air seemed to shimmer with divine presence, heavy with frankincense and myrrh smoke that rose continuously from bronze braziers tended by white-robed priests. The temple complex dedicated to Bastet was a smaller but no less magnificent version of the great temple at Bubastis. Built from rose-coloured granite that glowed like captured sunlight, the walls were covered with reliefs depicting cats in their various divine aspects, as protectors, mothers, hunters, and mystical bridges between the mortal world and the realm of gods. Golden inlays traced the carved hieroglyphs, creating texts that told stories of feline divine intervention in human affairs. Within the sacred grounds lived the temple cats, creatures so revered that they were considered living manifestations of the goddess herself. These extraordinary felines inhabited quarters that surpassed the luxury of many human nobles' homes. Their sleeping chambers were carved from solid granite and lined with the finest linen, while their food bowls were crafted from gold and silver, decorated with precious stones that caught and reflected light like captured starfire. The temple cat's daily routine was attended by a dedicated staff of priests whose sole responsibility was feline care. These sacred servants had trained for years to understand every nuance of cat behavior, interpreting movements, sounds, and preferences for divine messages. When a temple cat chose to sleep in a particular location, priests analyzed the spiritual significance. When they showed preference for certain foods, it was interpreted as guidance for temple offerings and ceremonies. Amenhotep watched in wonder as a high priest conducted the sacred ceremony of the golden whiskers, a ritual that demonstrated the elaborate spiritual hierarchy even among blessed cats. The ceremony began with the chanting of ancient hymns in the old language that predated even the pharaohs, while cats from various social backgrounds were brought forward for blessing according to their family's status and devotion. Noble cats were presented first, carried on silk cushions by servants who had purified themselves with sacred oils and meditation. These pampered felines wore collars that were artistic masterpieces, thick bands of gold inlaid with hieroglyphic texts that contained their owners' names, family lineages, and prayers for protection. The gold leaf applied to their whiskers during the ceremony was so thin it seemed to float like captured sunlight, adhering to the delicate hairs while supposedly enhancing the cat's ability to sense spiritual vibrations. The priest's movements during the blessing were choreographed with the precision of a sacred dance. He approached each noble cat with specific gestures designed to honor both the animal and the divine force it represented. His hands, decorated with henna patterns that mirrored the markings on sacred cats, moved in patterns that echoed hieroglyphic symbols, while he whispered prayers in ancient Egyptian that few outside the priesthood could understand. Middle-class families like Amenhotep's received blessings that were simpler but no less meaningful. Meat and tekem were presented to the priest on clean linen cloths rather than silk cushions, and instead of gold leaf on their whiskers, they received small clay amulets inscribed with protective symbols. These amulets were carefully crafted by temple artisans, each one blessed in separate ceremonies and imbued with spiritual power through days of prayer and sacred rituals. The priest explained to Amenhotep's family how their cats served as intermediaries between their household and the divine realm. Every purr was interpreted as a prayer rising to Bastet's ears, every successful hunt as a victory over the forces of chaos that constantly threatened the ordered world the gods had created. The cat's presence in their home created a sacred space where divine protection was continuously renewed and strengthened. Common families received the simplest but still deeply meaningful blessings. Their cats, often bearing the scars of harder lives spent hunting for survival rather than receiving regular meals, were honored with the same fundamental recognition of their sacred nature. The priest applied simple clay markings to their foreheads' geometric patterns that symbolized divine protection and would gradually wear away over several weeks, requiring renewal through continued devotion and temple visits. The ceremony of whispered names that followed was perhaps the most mysterious aspect of the temple rituals. Each cat received a secret spiritual name known only to their immediate family and the blessing priest. These names were believed to enhance the cat's supernatural abilities and strengthen their connection to the divine realm. The names were whispered so quietly that even nearby families couldn't overhear them, maintaining the mystical power that secrecy was believed to provide. Amenhotep learned that temple cats underwent the most elaborate naming ceremonies, receiving multiple secret names that reflected different aspects of their divine nature. Some names honored their role as protectors, others their connection to specific deities, and still others their ability to navigate between the world of the living and the realm of spirits. These names were recorded in sacred texts, that were carefully guarded in the temple's most secure chambers. The financial aspects of temple cat care revealed additional layers of social hierarchy. Wealthy families made substantial donations of gold, precious stones, and exotic foods to support the temple cat's luxurious lifestyle. These donations were considered investments in divine favor, with the understanding that caring for sacred cats would bring prosperity, protection, and spiritual advancement to the donor families. Middle-class families like Amenhotep's contributed what they could: copper vessels, quality fish, grain cakes, and skilled labor for temple maintenance. Even poor families found ways to support the temple cats, offering their time for cleaning duties, simple foods from their gardens, or handmade items that demonstrated their devotion despite limited resources. The temple's cat cemetery, visible through ornate bronze gates, contained mummified cats in various states of elaborate preparation. Noble cats rested in golden sarcophagi, decorated with precious stones and elaborate hieroglyphic texts, while middle-class cats were wrapped in fine linen with copper amulets, and even the poorest families' cats received basic mummification that ensured their journey to the afterlife. This equality in death demonstrated that while earthly circumstances might vary, all cats were equally sacred in the eyes of the gods. As the afternoon blessing ceremonies concluded, families departed with renewed spiritual confidence, knowing their feline guardians had been strengthened in their divine powers and prepared for continued protection of their households against the countless threats that lurked in both the physical and spiritual worlds. The late afternoon hours brought one of Amenhotep's favorite activities: the creation of artistic works that honored the sacred cats who shared his family's life. In the shaded corner of the courtyard, where the evening light filtered through palm fronds in geometric patterns, he settled with his artistic supplies to practice the ancient traditions that had made Egyptian cat art legendary throughout the known world. The artistic materials spread before him represented months of careful preparation and significant family investment. Papyrus sheets, made from reeds, harvested during the optimal season and processed according to ancient techniques, provided the perfect surface for detailed work. His palette contained pigments that were themselves sacred black coal, made from galena that would line both human and feline eyes, red ochre that symbolized life and vitality, blue and green minerals ground from malachite and azurite that represented the life-giving Nile, and precious gold leaf that captured the divine radiance of Ra's eternal light. Meat and Tekem seemed to understand their role as artistic muses, positioning themselves in naturally graceful poses that highlighted their elegant proportions and divine bearing. Meat chose to sit in the classic Egyptian cat pose upright and alert with her tail wrapped around her front paws, her green eyes focused on some distant point that suggested awareness of spiritual realms beyond human perception. This pose had been perfected in thousands of Egyptian artworks, representing the ideal balance between relaxed confidence and vigilant protection. Tekem preferred more dynamic positions that showcased her hunting prowess and physical capabilities. She would stretch herself along the warm limestone floor, her tawny coat creating beautiful contrasts against the pale stone, or crouch in the hunting position that had become iconic in Egyptian art, muscles coiled for action, eyes intensely focused, every line of her body expressing controlled power, ready to spring into action against the forces of chaos. The artistic techniques Amenhotep practiced had been developed over centuries by master craftsmen who understood that depicting cats wasn't merely artistic exercise, but religious devotion. Each line of his brush had to capture not only the physical beauty of his feline subjects, but also their spiritual essence and divine nature. The eyes required particular attention, They needed to convey the mysterious wisdom that Egyptians believed cats possessed, their ability to see into spiritual realms invisible to human perception. Creating art featuring cats required understanding of complex, symbolic language that conveyed deeper meanings to viewers. When Amenhotep painted meat with her head turned toward the east, it symbolized her connection to Ra's daily rebirth and her role in maintaining cosmic order. When he depicted Tekem with an arched back, it represented her readiness to defend against evil forces, while also suggesting the sacred number of protection that her curved spine created. The application of kohl around the cat's eyes was both practical and spiritual. The black mineral provided protection against the harsh Egyptian sun, while enhancing the cat's natural eye markings in ways that were believed to strengthen their supernatural vision. Amenhotep learned to apply the kohl with steady hands and reverent attention, understanding that he was participating in a sacred ritual that enhanced his companion's divine abilities. Working with live models taught him patience and observation skills that extended far beyond artistic technique. He learned to read subtle changes in the cat's moods and energy levels, understanding when they were comfortable posing and when they needed breaks for hunting, grooming, or simply moving to more comfortable positions. This attentiveness to feline needs was considered essential preparation for anyone hoping to create truly sacred art. The completed artwork served multiple purposes beyond mere decoration. Small cat sculptures and painted papyri were often given as offerings at temples, used as protective amulets in homes, or included in burial preparations to ensure feline companionship in the afterlife. Amenhotep's growing artistic skills meant his family could create their own protective art rather than purchasing expensive pieces from professional temple artists. The symbolic elements incorporated into cat art required deep knowledge of religious traditions and mythological stories. When Amenhotep painted lotus flowers around his cats, he was invoking symbols of rebirth and divine creation. Adding images of serpents being defeated by cats referenced the great mythological battle between order and chaos, while incorporating sacred geometric patterns created protective fields of divine energy around the feline subjects. The colours chosen for each artwork carried specific spiritual meanings that had been codified over generations of temple art. Gold represented the eternal and incorruptible nature of the divine, silver symbolized the moon's mysterious powers that cats were believed to channel, and the various blues and greens of the Nile palette connected the cats to Egypt's life-giving river. Even the background colours were chosen carefully deep blue nights for cats shown in their protective nocturnal roles, warm golden tones for depictions of cats basking in divine radiance. As the afternoon progressed, other family members joined the artistic session, each contributing their own skills to the sacred creative process. Nefertari brought her expertise in textile arts, demonstrating how cat motifs could be woven into linen and wool fabrics that would serve both decorative and protective purposes in the household. Her spinning wheel clicked rhythmically as she created threads dyed with precious minerals that would eventually become cloth decorated with running cats, seated guardian figures, and intricate geometric patterns inspired by feline markings. The family's servants also participated in ways that reflected their understanding of cats' sacred nature. They gathered specific clay from the Nile's banks that would be shaped into small cat figurines, amulets that could be worn for protection or placed in grain storage areas to enhance the living cat's guardianship. This clay was considered especially powerful because it came from the sacred river and would be shaped by hands that daily cared for living divine representatives. Amenhotep's grandfather, despite his advanced age, contributed the most valuable element to their artistic endeavours, ancient knowledge passed down through generations about the proper proportions, symbolic elements, and spiritual significance of cat art. He guided his grandson's brushstrokes with gentle words, explaining how the curve of a cat's back should echo the arc of the sun's daily journey, how the positioning of paws should reflect the cardinal directions, and how the tilt of ears should suggest attentiveness to divine communications. The old man shared stories of legendary cat artists from previous generations' masters who had created works so spiritually powerful that they were said to come alive during certain religious festivals. Temple artists whose cat sculptures were consulted by priests for divine guidance, and royal craftsmen whose depictions of cats were considered so sacred that they were buried with pharaohs to provide eternal protection in the afterlife. As Meat and Tecum moved through their modelling poses, they seemed to understand the sacred nature of their participation in the artistic process. Their movements became more deliberate and graceful, as if they were consciously demonstrating the ideal forms that should be captured in art. This collaboration between human artists and feline subjects created an atmosphere of shared devotion that elevated the creative process beyond mere craft to spiritual practice. The completed works from each afternoon session were carefully stored in a special cedar chest that had been blessed by temple priests and inscribed with protective hieroglyphs. This chest contained the family's growing collection of cat art paintings, sculptures, textile pieces, and small decorative objects that served as both beautiful ornaments and powerful spiritual protections for the household. Some pieces were designated for specific purposes: small portable amulets that family members carried for daily protection, larger works that would be placed in significant locations around the home to create fields of divine influence, and special ceremonial pieces reserved for important religious festivals or family celebrations. Each artwork was catalogued according to its spiritual purpose and the specific types of protection or blessing it was designed to provide. The artistic sessions also served as informal education for younger family members, teaching them not only technical skills, but also the deep cultural traditions that made cats so central to Egyptian civilization. Children learned to observe cats with the attention of artists and the reverence of devotees, developing the sensitivity to feline moods and behaviors that would serve them throughout their lives as cat guardians and spiritual practitioners. As the day's artistic work concluded and the light began to fade toward evening, the family's collection of cat art had grown by several beautiful pieces that would serve as permanent reminders of their feline companion's sacred nature and divine protection. The creative process had been both artistic achievement and religious devotion, demonstrating once again how completely cats were integrated into every aspect of Egyptian life and spirituality. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that Egyptians associated with Ra's journey through the underworld, the family gathered for the evening meal and the sacred storytelling traditions that had preserved feline wisdom for countless generations. The courtyard, now lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on painted walls, created an atmosphere of intimacy and spiritual reflection, perfect for sharing the ancient tales that connected cats to the very foundations of Egyptian civilization. Amenhotep's grandfather, Keti, occupied the place of honor on elaborately woven reed mats, his weathered hands gesturing expressively as he prepared to share stories that had been passed down through 40 generations of cat-revering families. His voice, though aged, carried the authority of one who had spent decades studying the sacred texts and observing the mysterious behaviors that made cats such powerful spiritual allies. Meat and Tecum positioned themselves strategically around the family circle, their golden eyes reflecting the lamplight, while their ears remained alert to sounds both audible and supernatural. Their presence during storytelling wasn't merely companionate. Egyptians believed that cats could sense the spiritual truth of ancient tales and would show signs of approval or concern that helped validate the accuracy of oral traditions being transmitted to younger generations. The first story Keti shared was the great cosmic battle between the divine cat and Apep, the serpent of chaos, who threatened to devour Ra's solar bark during its nightly journey through the underworld. His voice took on ritual cadences as he described how the great cat, a manifestation of Ra himself in feline form, fought the forces of destruction with claws that flashed like lightning and eyes that burned with the fire of 1,000 suns. Every household cat, he explained, carried within itself an echo of this cosmic protector, making their daily hunts against serpents and vermin sacred reenactments of the eternal struggle between order and chaos. Tekem's ears perked forward during the hunting descriptions, and her tail began the slow hypnotic movement that preceded her own hunting activities. The family interpreted this response as spiritual recognition. Their guardian cat was remembering her divine heritage and preparing to fulfill her own role in maintaining cosmic balance. When Keti described how the great cat's purring created vibrations that strengthened the barriers between order and chaos, Meat began a low rumbling purr that seemed to harmonize with his words. The stories revealed the complex social hierarchies that governed cat care across different levels of Egyptian society. Keti described royal cats who lived in palace harems, attended by dozens of servants, their every need anticipated and fulfilled by specialists trained in feline care. These palace cats wore collars worth more than most families' annual income, slept on silk cushions, stuffed with the finest goose down, and dined on delicacies imported from across the empire. Their offspring were distributed as diplomatic gifts to foreign rulers, spreading Egyptian cat worship throughout the known world. In contrast, he painted vivid pictures of working cats in temple granaries and royal warehouses, felines, who earned their keep through constant hunting, but were no less revered for their practical contributions to society. These cats lived more austere lives, but were honoured for their essential service in protecting Egypt's grain supplies from the rodents and serpents that could devastate stored food during lean years. Their successful hunts were celebrated with small festivals, and their deaths were mourned with ceremonies appropriate to fallen warriors in the eternal battle against chaos. The family's cats seemed to listen intently to descriptions of their various roles in Egyptian society, their expressions suggesting understanding of their place in the grand cosmic order. When Keti described how cats served as psychopomp's guides who helped human souls navigate the treacherous afterlife journey, both Meat and Tekem turned their gaze toward the family's small household shrine, as if acknowledging their responsibilities for their humans' spiritual welfare. During the meal that accompanied the storytelling, the cats received their evening portions with ritualistic dignity. The food offerings reflected the family's middle-class status-quality Nile fish, seasoned with herbs, portions of roasted duck, and grain cakes shaped like sacred symbols and flavoured with honey. While not as elaborate as the exotic delicacies served to noble cats, these offerings demonstrated proper respect for the cat's divine nature and the family's commitment to maintaining their sacred guardians in good health and spiritual power. Keti explained how different foods carried different spiritual significances in feline diets. Fish from the Nile connected cats to the life-giving river and enhanced their water-based magical abilities. Duck and other fowl strengthened their connection to air and sky deities, while grain cakes, blessed with holy oils, provided earthly grounding that balanced their supernatural aspects. The careful balance of these food types was believed to maintain the cat's ability to function effectively in both physical and spiritual realms. The storytelling session also included practical wisdom about cat care that had been accumulated over centuries of close observation. Ketty shared knowledge about reading the subtle signs of feline health and illness, understanding the behavioral changes that might indicate spiritual disturbances in the household, and recognizing the different types of purring that conveyed various emotional and spiritual states. He described the ceremony of whispered names in greater detail, explaining how each cat's secret spiritual name was chosen through careful observation of their individual characteristics and divine connections. These names were never spoken aloud except during the most sacred rituals, as their power could be diminished by casual use. The process of choosing appropriate names required deep knowledge of feline behavior, understanding of divine attributes, and sensitivity to the spiritual currents that flowed through different cats. The evening's tales also included cautionary stories about the consequences of mistreating cats or failing to provide proper care for these divine creatures. Families who neglected their feline guardians faced spiritual disasters, crop failures, business losses, illness, and vulnerability to evil spirits. These stories weren't merely moral teachings, but practical warnings based on generations of observed consequences, reinforcing the understanding that caring for cats was essential to maintaining divine favor and household prosperity. As the night deepened and the oil lamps burned lower, the stories grew more mystical and otherworldly. Ketty described cats who had appeared in dreams to warn of danger, feline spirits who had guided lost travelers to safety, and sacred cats whose deaths had been accompanied by supernatural phenomena that confirmed their divine nature. These tales created an atmosphere of wonder and reverence that reinforced the family's commitment to honoring their feline companions. The evening concluded with prayers of gratitude to Baste for the protection and blessing provided by Meat and Tecum, and requests for continued divine favor in the days ahead. The cats seemed to understand the spiritual significance of these prayers, positioning themselves in poses that mirrored the ritual positions depicted in temple art, while their gentle purring created a backdrop of sacred sound that enhanced the devotional atmosphere. As the last traces of twilight faded from the western sky and the great star goddess Nut spread her celestial body across the heavens, Meat and Tecum underwent a transformation that revealed their most sacred and mysterious nature. The approaching darkness awakened ancient instincts and supernatural abilities that made cats invaluable guardians against the malevolent forces that Egyptians believed prowled through the night hours, seeking to disrupt the cosmic order and harm those under divine protection. The transition from day to night was marked by subtle but significant changes in both cats' behavior and appearance. Their pupils dilated to capture every available photon of starlight and lamplight, transforming their eyes into luminous orbs that seemed to glow with inner fire. Egyptians believed this nocturnal radiance was evidence of cats' ability to see into the spirit world, where evil entities lurked invisible to human perception, but clearly visible to feline guardians, blessed with supernatural sight. Meat positioned herself at the threshold between the courtyard and the main living areas, a strategic location that allowed her to monitor both the family's sleeping quarters and the entrance routes that malevolent spirits might use to infiltrate the household. Her black coat, which had absorbed sunlight throughout the day, now seemed to blend with the shadows, while her green eyes remained visible as points of vigilant light that warned potential intruders of active spiritual protection. Tecum chose the rooftop terrace as her nocturnal command post, where she could survey the entire neighborhood while maintaining communication with other guardian cats throughout Memphis through subtle vocalizations that human ears could barely detect. Her elevated position allowed her to intercept aerial threats. Evil spirits were believed to travel through the night sky, as well as along ground pathways, while her commanding view of surrounding rooftops enabled coordination with the network of feline guardians that protected the entire community. The household's sleeping arrangements were designed to maximize the cat's protective capabilities while ensuring family members remained within the sphere of divine influence. Amenhotep's sleeping alcove was positioned so that either Meat or Tekem could maintain visual contact throughout the night, while small oil lamps burned continuously to provide the sacred light that evil spirits found difficult to tolerate. These lamps burned special oils, blessed by priests, and scented with frankincense that enhanced the spiritual barrier maintained by the cat's presence. Throughout the night hours, both cats maintained a patrol schedule that seemed choreographed by supernatural intelligence. They would alternate between active surveillance and meditative stillness, their behaviors synchronized in ways that suggested communication through senses unavailable to humans. When one cat moved to investigate a disturbance, the other would immediately adjust position to maintain complete coverage of the household's vulnerable areas. The sounds of night in ancient Memphis provided a complex soundscape that the cats navigated with supernatural skill. The distant roar of lions from the royal menageries, mixed with the calls of night birds, the splash of hippos in the Nile, and the mysterious rustling sounds that could indicate anything from harmless, small animals to dangerous serpents or malevolent spirits taking physical form. The cat's ears rotated constantly, filtering these sounds for threats, while their sensitive whiskers detected air currents that might carry the scent of approaching danger. Egyptians believed that the most dangerous hours were those just before dawn, when the boundary between night and day created spiritual instability that evil forces could exploit. During these critical hours, both cats would enter states of heightened alertness that seemed to border on trance. Their breathing would become so shallow as to be almost imperceptible, their bodies motionless, except for the occasional twitch of ears or whiskers, while their glowing eyes tracked movements in dimensions invisible to human perception. The family's peaceful sleep during these dangerous hours was considered direct evidence of their cat's supernatural protective abilities. Parents would check on sleeping children by observing the cat's behavior rather than risking disturbance. If Meat and Tekem remained calm and relaxed, it indicated that all spiritual defenses were functioning properly and no threats had penetrated the household's divine protection. Occasionally, the cat's nocturnal vigilance would be tested by genuine supernatural encounters that validated Egyptian beliefs about feline protective powers. Amenhotep remembered nights when both cats had suddenly become intensely agitated, their fur standing on end, while they stared at apparently empty corners of rooms and emitted low growls that seemed to resonate with otherworldly frequencies. During these episodes, the entire family would remain in their sleeping areas while the cats performed their sacred duty of confronting and banishing whatever malevolent presence had attempted to infiltrate their home. The morning after such encounters, the cats would appear drained but victorious, requiring extra attention and nourishment to recover from their spiritual battles. These recovery periods were treated as sacred time, with family members maintaining quiet voices and gentle movements while their exhausted guardians restored their supernatural energies through extended sleep and careful grooming rituals. The broader community of Memphis was protected by a network of guardian cats whose nocturnal activities created overlapping fields of spiritual protection that shielded the entire city from supernatural threats. Professional cat watchers, specially trained individuals who understood feline behavior and spiritual significance, would make nocturnal rounds to observe the guardian cats and ensure that the protective network remained intact throughout the dangerous night hours. These watchers carried special staffs topped with cat figurines and wore amulets that identified them to the guardian cats as allies rather than potential threats. They would pause at households where cats showed signs of spiritual distress, offering assistance through prayers, protective rituals, or temporary reinforcement from specially trained temple cats who served as supernatural reinforcements during particularly dangerous nights. The relationship between human families and their nocturnal feline guardians created bonds of mutual dependence that went far beyond ordinary pet ownership. Humans provided food, shelter, and daytime care that maintained the cat's physical health and spiritual power, while cats provided round-the-clock protection against dangers that could destroy families, businesses, and entire communities. This partnership represented one of the most successful forms of interspecies cooperation in human history. As dawn approached and the first pale light began to appear on the eastern horizon, both cats would gradually shift from their vigilant nocturnal mode back to the more relaxed daytime consciousness that characterized their diurnal activities. This transition was marked by elaborate stretching rituals that seemed to release the spiritual tensions accumulated during their night watch, followed by thorough grooming sessions that restored their coats to perfect condition after hours of vigilant service. The successful completion of another night's protection was celebrated through morning offerings of special foods and expressions of gratitude that acknowledged the cat's sacred service. These daily renewals of appreciation maintained the spiritual contract between human families and their feline guardians, ensuring continued divine protection through the endless cycle of days and nights that structured Egyptian life. Once each year, the normal rhythms of daily life in Memphis were transformed by the great festival of Bastet, a celebration so magnificent and spiritually significant that it drew hundreds of thousands of pilgrims from across Egypt and beyond. This was the most sacred time for cats and their human companions, when the divine connection between felines and the goddess reached its peak intensity, creating opportunities for spiritual renewal and divine blessing that would sustain faithful families throughout the coming year. Preparations for the festival began weeks in advance, as Amenhotep's family joined their neighbours in creating the elaborate decorations, special foods, and ceremonial objects that would honour Bastet and her earthly representatives. The entire household was transformed into a shrine worthy of divine visitation, with walls freshly painted in the sacred colours associated with cat worship: gold for divine radiance, deep blue for nighttime protection, and the rich greens of the life-giving Nile that sustained both cats and humans. Meet and Tekem underwent their own preparations that were as elaborate as those for any human festival participants. Special baths using water blessed by temple priests removed any spiritual contamination accumulated during their routine protective duties, while their coats were brushed until they gleamed like polished metal. Their copper collars were temporarily replaced with festival regalia that had been crafted specifically for this annual celebration: ornate pieces, decorated with tiny bells that created musical accompaniment to their movements, and carved amulets that enhanced their connection to Bastet's divine power. The journey to Bubastis, the goddess's primary temple city, was itself a sacred pilgrimage that demonstrated the extraordinary reverence Egyptians held for their feline companions. Meet and Tekem travelled in a specially constructed carrier that was essentially a miniature temple on wheels, a wooden framework covered with linen curtains decorated with cat motifs and equipped with comfortable cushions, fresh water, and aromatic herbs that would keep the cats calm during the long journey along the Nile. The roads leading to Bubastis during festival season were crowded with similar processions from every corner of Egypt, creating a massive migration that included humans and cats from every social class and profession. Noble families travelled in elaborate barges, with multiple decks reserved for their pampered cats, while middle-class families, like Amenhotep's, joined group expeditions that shared transportation costs and created communities of mutual support during the pilgrimage. The festival itself was a sensory explosion that overwhelmed visitors with its scale, beauty, and spiritual intensity. The great temple of Bastet rose from an artificial island surrounded by canals, its walls covered with golden reliefs that depicted cats in every conceivable sacred pose and divine manifestation. The air was thick with incense smoke from thousands of burning braziers, while the sound of sistrum, rattles, drums, and bells created rhythmic accompaniments to prayers and hymns that continued day and night throughout the festival period. Within the temple precincts, cats from across Egypt participated in ceremonies that celebrated different aspects of their divine nature. The sacred mating ritual was perhaps the most elaborate of these ceremonies, where cats from noble families were paired in elaborate processions that included golden marriage collars, silk cushions, and ceremonial foods designed to ensure fertile unions that would produce offspring blessed with enhanced spiritual powers. Amenhotep watched in amazement as these noble feline couples were presented to the assembled crowds, like royal family members announcing dynastic alliances. Each pair was accompanied by priests who chanted genealogies, tracing the cat's lineages back through generations of sacred breeding programs designed to concentrate divine favor, in particular family lines. The ritual culminated with the cats being presented with matching golden collars that would permanently mark their sacred union and the special status of any offspring that might result. Common cats participated in different but equally meaningful ceremonies that celebrated their democratic access to divine grace. The community blessing circles brought together cats from poor families for group rituals that emphasized how spiritual power transcended economic circumstances. These ceremonies featured simple clay bowls filled with blessed water from the sacred lake surrounding Bastet's temple, allowing even the poorest families to provide their cats with access to the goddess's most powerful spiritual emanations. The Feast of Nine Lives ceremony was the festival's most spectacular public event, featuring cats from all social backgrounds, participating in elaborate dining rituals that symbolized the abundance and eternal protection that Bastet provided to her feline children and their human families. Long tables covered with linen cloths were arranged in geometric patterns that echoed the temple's architecture, while cats were presented with 9 different delicacies representing different aspects of divine blessing. Meat and Tekem participated in this feast with obvious enjoyment, sampling delicacies they would never encounter during ordinary daily life. Exotic fish from distant rivers, specially prepared grain cakes flavoured with rare spices, roasted fowl seasoned with herbs sacred to various deities, and honey treats shaped like hieroglyphic symbols, created a banquet that celebrated both physical pleasure and spiritual significance. The cat's reactions to different foods were carefully observed by priests who interpreted their preferences for divine guidance about the coming year's prospects. The festival also featured competitive events that showcased cats' various sacred abilities. Hunting contests demonstrated their prowess against the forces of chaos, with elaborate courses designed to test speed, accuracy, and spiritual connection during pursuit of specially prepared targets that represented different types of evil spirits and malevolent creatures. Agility competitions revealed cats' supernatural ability to navigate between physical and spiritual dimensions, while beauty contests celebrated the divine perfection of feline form and the careful breeding programs that maintained sacred bloodlines. Perhaps the most moving aspect of the festival was the great mummification ceremony, where cats who had died during the previous year were honoured with elaborate funeral rituals that ensured their successful transition to the afterlife. Noble cats received mummification treatments that rivaled those of human royalty, with golden sarcophagi, decorated with precious stones and elaborate hieroglyphic texts that would guide them through the underworld's dangers. Middle-class cats, like those from Amenhotep's family, received carefully prepared mummification with fine linen wrappings and copper amulets that provided spiritual protection during their afterlife journey. Even the poorest families could ensure basic mummification for their beloved cats, with temple priests providing services funded by donations from wealthier pilgrims who understood that divine favour required caring for all of Bastet's children, regardless of their earthly circumstances. The festival concluded with the great procession of eternal guardians, where living cats from across Egypt were paraded through the temple complex in a massive celebration of their ongoing role as divine protectors. The procession lasted from dawn to dusk, with cats arranged according to their various sacred functions. Temple guardians leading the way, followed by household protectors, working cats from granaries and warehouses, and finally, the smallest kittens who represented hope for continued divine protection in future generations. As Amenhotep's family prepared for their return journey to Memphis, they carried with them renewed spiritual energy and divine blessings that would sustain them throughout the coming year. The festival had reinforced their understanding of cats' sacred nature, while providing Meat and Tecum with enhanced spiritual power that would make them even more effective guardians of their household safety and prosperity. The return journey from the festival of Bastet created time for quiet reflection on the profound spiritual bonds that connected Egyptian families to their feline guardians across the mysteries of life, death, and eternal existence. As their boat drifted slowly northward on the Nile's current, with Memphis still days away, Amenhotep contemplated the sacred relationships that had shaped his civilization for millennia and would continue to influence human-cat partnerships throughout history. The late afternoon sun painted the river in shades of gold that reminded him of the divine radiance that seemed to emanate from Meat and Tecum as they rested contentedly on their cushions, their festival experiences having deepened their spiritual connection to Bastet's divine power. Their copper collars had been blessed with oils and prayers that would maintain the enhanced spiritual protection they had received during the sacred ceremonies, creating invisible but powerful barriers against evil influences that might threaten their household. Amenhotep's father, Waset, used the peaceful journey time to share deeper teachings about the spiritual significance of their relationship with their feline guardians. These weren't lessons that could be taught in busy daily life, but required the contemplative atmosphere created by the rhythm of water against the boat's hull and the vast silence of the river valley stretching endlessly in all directions. The sacred bond between humans and cats, Waset explained, extends far beyond the boundaries of a single lifetime or even the span of earthly existence. When we care for our feline guardians with proper devotion, we create spiritual connections that will reunite us in the afterlife and provide eternal companionship through all the challenges and joys that await us in the realm of the gods. This teaching was illustrated by stories of legendary partnerships between humans and cats that had transcended death through the power of mutual devotion and spiritual commitment. Kame Wasset described tomb paintings depicting deceased families reunited with their beloved cats in idealized afterlife hunting grounds, where eternal abundance provided perfect conditions for continued companionship without the struggles and limitations of earthly existence. The mummification practices that preserved cats for afterlife reunions represented one of the most sophisticated expressions of interspecies spiritual partnership in human history. The elaborate procedures used to prepare feline bodies for eternal preservation required the same skills and sacred materials used for human mummification, demonstrating that cats were considered genuine family members, deserving identical treatment in death as they had received in life. Meat and Tekem seemed to understand the spiritual significance of these discussions, their behavior becoming more contemplative and dignified, as if they were consciously preparing for their own eventual roles as afterlife guardians. They positioned themselves in poses that echoed the artistic depictions of cats in tomb paintings, alert but peaceful, protective but serene, embodying the eternal vigilance that would continue their sacred duties beyond the boundaries of mortal existence. The boat's other passengers, fellow pilgrims returning from the festival with their own feline companions, created an informal community of shared devotion that reinforced the universal nature of cat worship across Egyptian society. Stories were shared about miraculous interventions by deceased cats who had appeared in dreams to warn of danger, provide guidance during difficult decisions, or offer comfort during times of grief and loss. These supernatural encounters weren't considered unusual or remarkable, but rather natural expressions of the eternal bonds that connected devoted families to their feline guardians across the boundaries of life and death. The spiritual realm was understood to be as real and accessible as the physical world, with cats serving as skilled navigators who could travel easily between dimensions and maintain their protective duties regardless of their corporeal status. The economics of cat care during earthly life were understood as investments in eternal spiritual security that would pay dividends throughout the infinite duration of afterlife existence. Families who provided excellent care for their cats during mortal life could expect enhanced protection and companionship in the afterlife, while those who neglected their feline guardians faced spiritual consequences that could affect their soul's well-being for eternity. This understanding created powerful motivation for families to provide the best possible care for their cats, regardless of temporary financial difficulties or competing demands on their resources. The spiritual insurance provided by devoted cat care was considered far more valuable than material wealth that would be left behind at death, making proper feline guardianship one of the most important family responsibilities in Egyptian culture. The festival experiences had also strengthened the cat's connections to the broader community of feline guardians that protected Egyptian civilization through their collective spiritual power. Meat and Tekem had participated in group rituals that linked them to cats throughout Egypt and beyond, creating a network of supernatural protection that extended far beyond individual households to encompass entire cities, regions, and ultimately the entire Egyptian empire. This collective feline consciousness was believed to be coordinated by Bastet herself, who used her earthly representatives to maintain cosmic balance and protect the ordered civilization that the gods had established along the Nile. Individual cats served as both independent guardians and components of a vast supernatural system that operated continuously to preserve Egyptian society against the forces of chaos and destruction that constantly threatened human achievements. As the boat carried them closer to Memphis and the resumption of normal daily routines. Amenhotep felt profound gratitude for the sacred partnerships that enriched his family's life with divine protection, spiritual meaning, and the deep contentment that came from living in harmony with creatures blessed by the gods themselves. The festival had renewed and strengthened these bonds while providing glimpses of the eternal companionship that awaited faithful families in the afterlife. The setting sun painted the sky in colours that seemed to echo the divine radiance depicted in temple art, while Meet and Tekhem settled into their evening rest with the peaceful confidence of creatures secure in their sacred purpose and cherished by the humans whose lives they protected. The day's journey had brought them closer to home, while deepening their appreciation for the timeless bonds that connected them across species boundaries through the mysterious but powerful love that cats and humans had shared since the dawn of Egyptian civilization. The gentle rocking of the boat and the soft sound of water against the hull created a peaceful conclusion to their spiritual pilgrimage, while the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky reminded them of the eternal nature of their sacred relationships and the divine protection that would continue throughout all their journeys, both earthly and celestial. The rhythm of Egyptian life was governed by the eternal cycle of the Nile's flooding, which brought both physical renewal to the land and spiritual regeneration to the sacred bonds between humans and their feline guardians. As Amenhotep's family settled back into their daily routines following the great festival, they found that each season brought unique opportunities to deepen their relationship with Meet and Tekhem, while honouring the changing aspects of Bastet's divine power throughout the year. The season of Akhet, when the Nile's annual flood covered the land with life-giving water and fertile silt, was considered the most spiritually potent time for renewing the protective contracts between families and their feline guardians. The rising waters were seen as physical manifestations of divine blessing flowing across Egypt, and cats were believed to be especially sensitive to the spiritual energies that accompanied this natural miracle. During the flood season, Meet and Tekhem's behaviour changed in ways that reflected their enhanced spiritual awareness of the cosmic forces reshaping their world. They became more contemplative and alert, spending long hours in meditation-like states while positioned at windows and doorways where they could observe the transformation of the familiar landscape into a vast lake dotted with islands of human habitation. The family's elevated mud brick home became a temporary island during the highest flood stages, accessible only by boat and completely dependent on stored supplies that the cats had spent the dry season protecting from vermin and decay. This annual isolation created intimate conditions that deepened the bonds between human and feline family members, as they shared confined spaces and limited resources while waiting for the waters to recede and normal life to resume. The flooding also brought increased hunting opportunities that allowed the cats to demonstrate their sacred prowess in new environments. Fish that normally lived only in the Nile's main channels now swam past doorways and through courtyards, creating unusual hunting scenarios that tested Meet and Tekhem's adaptability and skill. Their success at catching these temporary aquatic visitors was interpreted as evidence of divine favour and a positive omen for the coming year's prosperity. Peret, the growing season that followed the flood's recession, brought different spiritual opportunities as the renewed earth burst with plant growth that attracted unprecedented numbers of birds, small mammals, and insects that provided abundant hunting opportunities for the household cats. This season was associated with Bastet's maternal and nurturing aspects, as the goddess's blessing was seen in every sprouting seed and growing plant that would eventually feed Egypt's people and animals. During Peret, the cat's hunting activities took on ceremonial significance as they helped protect the young crops from the various pests that threatened to consume Egypt's agricultural abundance. Farmers throughout the region would borrow cats from temple breeding programs or wealthy families, understanding that feline protection was essential to securing successful harvests that would sustain the population through the coming year. Amenhotep often accompanied his father on visits to the family's small agricultural plots outside Memphis, where they would observe Meet and Tecum working alongside dozens of other cats to protect the growing crops from rodents, birds, and insects that could devastate entire fields if left unchecked. These cooperative hunting expeditions demonstrated how individual cats could coordinate their efforts for community benefit while maintaining their individual sacred status and family loyalties. The agricultural season also brought opportunities for the cats to interact with other species in ways that revealed their unique position in the Egyptian cosmic order. Working alongside farmers' dogs, draft cattle, and domestic fowl, cats maintained their superior spiritual status while contributing practical services that were essential to community survival. Their ability to work cooperatively with other animals while retaining their divine nature made them perfect mediators between the human and animal worlds. Shemu, the harvest season, was the time of greatest celebration and gratitude as the success of Egyptian agriculture was gathered and stored for the coming year. The cat's role in protecting these harvests from spoilage and theft made them central figures in the Thanksgiving ceremonies that marked the completion of another successful agricultural cycle. During harvest festivals, cats were honored with special ceremonies that acknowledged their essential contributions to Egyptian prosperity. Temples held blessing rituals where cats were presented with portions of the first fruits and grains, symbolic offerings that recognized their role in making the abundant harvests possible through their year-round protection of stored foods and growing crops. The seasonal cycle also influenced the cat's breeding patterns, with most litters born during Pere when mild weather and abundant food supplies provided optimal conditions for raising healthy kittens. These seasonal births were considered especially blessed, as kittens born during the growing season were believed to carry enhanced spiritual power that would make them particularly effective guardians throughout their lives. Amenhotep's family had developed traditions for honoring these seasonal transitions that involved their feline guardians in meaningful ways. Special foods were prepared using ingredients associated with each season-fresh fish during the flood season, small birds and eggs during the growing season, and grain-based treats during the harvest period. These seasonal dietary changes helped maintain the cat's health while symbolically connecting them to the cosmic cycles that governed all life in Egypt. The seasonal ceremonies also included artistic activities that documented the cat's changing roles and behaviors throughout the year. Amenhotep created special artwork for each season paintings that captured Meet and Tecum in poses appropriate to different times of year, sculptures that celebrated their seasonal hunting successes, and textile works that incorporated symbols of renewal and abundance associated with each phase of the agricultural cycle. These seasonal art projects served both decorative and spiritual purposes, creating permanent records of the cat's sacred service while providing focus for family prayers and meditations throughout the year. The completed works were stored in the family's shrine room, where they could be consulted for spiritual guidance and used as focal points for ceremonies marking important transitions and celebrations. The cyclical nature of Egyptian life, governed by the Nile's reliable patterns and the unchanging movement of celestial bodies, created a framework within which the sacred bond between humans and cats could deepen and evolve across years and generations. Each season brought new opportunities for spiritual growth and renewed appreciation for the divine gifts that feline guardians provided to their human families. As the agricultural year concluded and preparations began for the next cycle, Amenhotep reflected on how completely cats were integrated into every aspect of Egyptian existence, from daily practical tasks to the most profound spiritual mysteries. This integration wasn't accidental, but represented thousands of years of cultural evolution that had created one of history's most successful examples of interspecies cooperation and mutual spiritual benefit. The seasonal festivals and ceremonies ensured that each year brought renewed commitment to the sacred partnership between humans and cats, while providing opportunities for both species to fulfill their respective roles in maintaining the cosmic balance that kept Egyptian civilization prosperous and protected from the various forces that threatened ordered society. The deepest hours of night in Memphis revealed aspects of feline guardianship that daylight could never illuminate. As Meat and Tecum engaged in surveillance activities that protected not only their immediate household, but contributed to the vast network of supernatural security that shielded Egyptian civilization from threats both visible and invisible, earthly and spiritual. The midnight hours were considered the most dangerous time in the Egyptian cosmic cycle, when the sun god Ra battled Apep in the underworld and the forces of chaos pressed most strongly against the barriers that maintained order in the mortal realm. During these critical hours, every cat in Egypt was believed to participate in a collective spiritual vigil that reinforced the divine protections established by the gods and maintained through human devotion and feline service. Meat's nocturnal patrol route followed patterns that seemed to be guided by supernatural intelligence rather than simple territorial instinct. She would move silently through the house, pausing at specific locations where she would sit motionless for extended periods, her glowing eyes fixed on apparently empty spaces that might conceal spiritual threats invisible to human perception. Her chosen observation points corresponded to sacred geometric principles that governed temple architecture positions that created optimal spiritual surveillance coverage of the entire household. From her rooftop command post, Tecum maintained communication with other guardian cats throughout the neighborhood through vocalizations that operated at frequencies barely audible to human ears. These calls served multiple purposes: coordinating patrol schedules to ensure complete coverage of the community, sharing information about detected threats or unusual spiritual activity, and maintaining the network's solidarity that made collective feline protection so effective against supernatural dangers. The cat's nighttime activities were guided by their extraordinary sensory abilities, which Egyptians believed extended far beyond normal animal senses into supernatural perception that allowed them to detect spiritual entities and divine communications. Their whiskers could sense minute changes in air pressure that indicated approaching evil spirits, while their sensitive hearing could detect the otherworldly sounds that accompanied supernatural manifestations. Professional cat watchers who made nocturnal rounds through Memphis neighborhoods had developed sophisticated understanding of feline supernatural behavior that allowed them to interpret the guardian cat's activities for signs of community-wide spiritual conditions. When multiple cats in a neighborhood showed similar behavioral changes, increased alertness, unusual positioning, or coordinated vocalizations, it could indicate approaching threats that required intervention from temple priests or additional protective rituals. These watchers carried detailed maps of Memphis that marked the locations of guardian cats and their typical patrol patterns, allowing them to identify when normal protective routines had been disrupted by supernatural interference. They wore special amulets that made them recognizable to the cats as allies rather than potential threats, and carried small offerings of food and blessed oils that could be used to restore cats' spiritual energy after particularly demanding supernatural encounters. The most mysterious aspect of nocturnal feline guardianship was their apparent ability to coordinate activities across vast distances through methods that transcended normal animal communication. Cats in Memphis seemed to respond instantly to spiritual disturbances in distant cities like Thebes or Alexandria, suggesting participation in a supernatural communication network that connected all of Egypt's feline guardians in a unified protective system. During the darkest hours before dawn, when Ra's battle with chaos reached its most critical phase, the cats would enter states of heightened spiritual awareness that made them appear almost trance-like to human observers. Their breathing would become so shallow as to be imperceptible, their bodies completely motionless, except for the subtle movements of ears and whiskers that tracked supernatural phenomena beyond human detection. These deep meditation states were considered forms of prayer that strengthened the spiritual barriers protecting Egyptian civilization from the forces of destruction that constantly sought to overthrow the divine order. The cats' participation in these cosmic struggles made them partners with the gods themselves in maintaining the stability and prosperity that allowed human society to flourish along the Nile. Occasionally, the nocturnal vigil would be interrupted by actual supernatural encounters that tested the cat's protective abilities and validated Egyptian beliefs about their divine nature. Amenhotep remembered nights when both cats had suddenly become intensely agitated, their fur standing on end, while they faced apparently empty corners of rooms with defensive postures that suggested confrontation with invisible adversaries. During these encounters, the cats would emit low growls that seemed to resonate with otherworldly frequencies, creating vibrations that human observers could feel in their bones rather than simply hear with their ears. The spiritual battles that followed were invisible to human perception, but could be inferred from the cat's behaviors. Sudden movements as if dodging attacks, aggressive postures suggesting counterattacks, and eventual relaxation indicating successful banishment of whatever malevolent presence had threatened the household. The morning after such supernatural confrontations, the cats would appear drained but victorious, requiring special care and nourishment to recover their spiritual energy. These recovery periods were treated as sacred time, with family members maintaining quiet voices and gentle movements, while their exhausted guardians restored their supernatural abilities through extended rest and careful attention to spiritual as well as physical needs. The nocturnal protection provided by cats extended beyond supernatural threats to include very practical dangers that could devastate households during vulnerable sleeping hours. Venomous serpents, scorpions, and other dangerous creatures were most active during night hours, and the cat's vigilant patrol activities prevented encounters that could prove fatal to sleeping family members. The integration of spiritual and practical protection made cats invaluable guardians whose services couldn't be replaced by any other form of security available in the ancient world. Their supernatural senses allowed them to detect threats before they became dangerous, while their divine status ensured that their protective activities were supported by cosmic forces that enhanced their natural abilities far beyond normal animal capabilities. As dawn approached and the spiritual dangers of night began to recede before Ra's returning light, both cats would gradually transition from their vigilant, supernatural mode back to the more relaxed consciousness that characterized their daytime activities. This daily transformation was marked by elaborate stretching and grooming rituals that seemed to release spiritual tensions while preparing them for the different types of guardianship duties that occupied daylight hours. The successful completion of another night's protection was celebrated through morning offerings and expressions of gratitude that acknowledged the cat's sacred service while renewing the spiritual contracts that maintained their divine protection. These daily renewals of appreciation ensured that the bonds between human families and their feline guardians remained strong and effective throughout the endless cycle of nights and days that structured Egyptian existence. The accumulated wisdom of Egyptian cat worship represented one of humanity's most sophisticated understanding of interspecies, spiritual partnership, knowledge that had been refined across millennia of careful observation, religious devotion, and practical experience. As Amenhotep progressed in his studies to become a master scribe, he also deepened his understanding of the complex theological and practical traditions that made cats such integral partners in Egyptian civilization. The temple libraries contained vast collections of papyrus scrolls, documenting every aspect of feline care, behavior interpretation, and spiritual significance that priests and dedicated scholars had compiled over countless generations. These texts were considered as sacred as any religious literature, containing knowledge that was essential to maintaining the divine protection that cats provided to Egyptian society through their supernatural abilities and cosmic connections. Amenhotep's access to these sacred texts through his father's position in the temple hierarchy revealed the incredible depth of Egyptian cat scholarship. Detailed behavioral studies described how to interpret hundreds of different cat postures, vocalizations, and movement patterns for their spiritual significance. Medical texts provided comprehensive information about feline healthcare, including herbal remedies, surgical procedures, and spiritual healing techniques that addressed both physical ailments and supernatural afflictions. The breeding records maintained by temple cat keepers documented genealogies that extended back over 20 generations, tracking bloodlines that were believed to carry enhanced spiritual power through careful selection for divine favor, supernatural abilities, and physical characteristics associated with particular aspects of Bastet's nature. These records were consulted when arranging marriages between cats from different families, ensuring that offspring would inherit the maximum possible spiritual capabilities. Meat and Tekem's own lineages could be traced through these sacred records to ancestors who had served in famous temples, protected legendary pharaohs, and participated in historical events that had shaped Egyptian civilization. This genealogical knowledge wasn't merely academic interest, but practical information that helped explain their individual abilities and spiritual specializations, guiding their training and care to maximize their effectiveness as divine guardians. The theological texts explored the complex relationship between Bastet and other deities in the Egyptian pantheon, revealing how cats served as intermediaries not only with their patron goddess, but with the entire divine hierarchy that governed different aspects of existence. Through their cats, families could access divine influence over agriculture, commerce, family relationships, health, and spiritual protection that extended their religious practice far beyond formal temple worship. Advanced practitioners of cat-based spirituality learned to interpret the subtle signs that indicated different types of divine communication flowing through their feline companions. A particular way of sitting might indicate messages about future business ventures, while specific grooming patterns could reveal guidance about family decisions or warnings about potential dangers that required preventive action. The most sacred knowledge involved understanding how cats' spiritual abilities could be enhanced through proper care, training, and environmental conditions that optimized their supernatural capabilities. This included detailed information about the types of food that strengthened different aspects of feline divine power, architectural principles for designing living spaces that maximize spiritual energy flow, and ritual practices that deepened the bonds between human families and their sacred guardians. Amenhotep learned that the most accomplished families developed almost telepathic communication with their cats, able to sense their guardians' spiritual observations and respond appropriately to divine guidance transmitted through feline behavior. This level of interspecies communication required years of patient observation and spiritual development that paralleled the training undergone by temple priests in their religious studies. The sacred texts also contained warnings about the consequences of mistreating cats or failing to provide proper spiritual as well as physical care for these divine creatures. Historical accounts described families, cities, and even entire regions that had suffered disasters after neglecting their obligations to their feline guardians, demonstrating that the protective contract between humans and cats required constant attention and genuine devotion to remain effective. Master cat keepers who had achieved legendary status in Egyptian society were celebrated in texts that described their innovations in feline care, their discoveries about cat behavior and spiritual significance, and their contributions to the growing body of knowledge that made Egyptian cat worship the most sophisticated such practice in the ancient world. These masters served as inspirational examples for families seeking to deepen their relationships with their own feline guardians. The preservation and transmission of this sacred knowledge required elaborate educational systems that ensured essential information about cat care and spiritual partnership would survive across generations. Young people like Amenhotep underwent formal apprenticeships with experienced cat keepers, learning through direct observation and hands-on practice the skills needed to maintain proper relationships with their divine guardians. The sacred texts also explored the cosmic significance of the human-cat partnership within the broader framework of Egyptian cosmology and religious philosophy. Cats were understood to represent the perfect balance between wildness and domesticity, independence and loyalty, earthly existence and spiritual transcendence, that made them ideal mediators between human concerns and divine will. This theological understanding elevated cat care from simple animal husbandry to spiritual practice that could influence the practitioner's development toward greater wisdom, compassion, and connection to divine truth. Families who achieved mastery in cat guardianship were considered to have attained a form of religious enlightenment that prepared them for enhanced spiritual responsibilities and greater divine favor. The most advanced practitioners developed abilities that seemed to border on supernatural themselves, an intuitive understanding of feline needs and desires that allowed them to anticipate their cat's requirements before they were expressed, sensitivity to spiritual currents that flowed through their feline companions, and interpretive skills that could decode complex divine messages transmitted through subtle changes in cat behavior. These master practitioners served as consultants for other families seeking to improve their relationships with their feline guardians, teachers for young people learning proper cat care techniques, and intermediaries who could help resolve spiritual problems that manifested through disruptions in normal cat behavior patterns. As Amenhotep's understanding of these sacred mysteries deepened, he began to appreciate how his daily interactions with Meat and Tekem were part of a vast spiritual tradition that connected him to thousands of years of Egyptian wisdom, while preparing him for a lifetime of divine partnership that would continue beyond death into eternal companionship in the afterlife realms, where cats and humans would hunt together in perfect harmony through endless marshes of abundance and joy. As the seasons cycled through their eternal patterns and Amenhotep matured from youth into adulthood, his understanding of the sacred bond with Meet and Tekem deepened into profound wisdom about the nature of love, loyalty, and spiritual connection that transcended the boundaries between species and the limitations of mortal existence. The years had brought changes to the household, new family members, evolving responsibilities, and the inevitable passages that marked the progression of life. But the essential relationship with their feline guardians remained constant, growing stronger and more meaningful with each shared experience. Meet, now bearing the distinguished silver whiskers that marked feline elderhood, had evolved from an energetic young hunter into a wise guardian whose very presence seemed to radiate spiritual authority, accumulated through years of faithful service. Her movements had gained a measured dignity that reflected her enhanced status as a senior feline protector, while her golden eyes held depths of experience that seemed to contain all the mysteries of her species' ancient partnership with Egyptian civilization. Tekem, though younger, had demonstrated remarkable spiritual gifts that marked her as potentially one of the legendary cats whose names would be recorded in temple histories for future generations to study and honor. Her hunting abilities had transcended mere pest control to become almost supernatural displays of divine intervention, while her protective instincts had expanded to encompass not only the immediate household, but the broader community of neighbors and friends, whose welfare she seemed to consider part of her sacred responsibility. The approach of Meet's eventual transition to the afterlife had begun to influence family planning in ways that demonstrated the depth of Egyptian commitment to maintaining eternal bonds with their feline guardians. Preparations for her mummification had begun years in advance, with the family setting aside resources to ensure she would receive the elaborate preservation treatment that her years of faithful service deserved, and that would guarantee her successful journey to the afterlife realms. The mummification process, planned for Meet, involved the finest materials and most skilled practitioners available to middle-class families, natron salts harvested from sacred deposits, linen wrappings blessed by temple priests, and protective amulets crafted specifically for her individual spiritual needs and accomplishments. Her copper collar would be replaced with a golden one, inscribed with her secret spiritual names and the record of her most significant protective interventions on behalf of the family. The family shrine had been expanded to include a special alcove where Meet's mummified form would eventually rest until the family's own deaths allowed their reunion in the afterlife hunting grounds. This alcove was decorated with paintings depicting the ideal afterlife relationship between humans and cat scenes of eternal hunting in marshes filled with abundant game, peaceful rest in gardens of perpetual bloom, and joyful reunions that would last throughout infinite time. Tekem's role in the household was gradually expanding as she prepared to assume Meet's responsibilities as senior guardian, while maintaining her own specialized duties as protector against supernatural threats. The transition of authority between generations of cats required careful management to ensure continuity of protection, while allowing both felines to fulfill their appropriate roles according to their age and capabilities. The family had also begun preparations for welcoming Tekem's future offspring, understanding that maintaining continuous feline protection required planning for generational succession that would provide guardian cats for Amenhotep's own children and grandchildren. The bloodlines carefully maintained through temple breeding programs ensured that each new generation of cats would carry enhanced spiritual abilities inherited from ancestors who had served with distinction in protecting Egyptian families. Temple consultations about optimal breeding partners for Tekem involved complex considerations of genetic heritage, spiritual compatibility, and divine favor that required expert interpretation of sacred texts and careful analysis of both cats' demonstrated abilities and family histories. The resulting offspring would inherit not only physical characteristics, but also spiritual gifts that had been concentrated through generations of selective breeding guided by religious principles. The educational traditions that prepared young people for lifelong partnership with feline guardians were being passed to Amenhotep's younger siblings, who learned through direct observation and guided practice how to read cat behavior, provide proper care, and interpret the spiritual significance of their guardians' activities. This knowledge transfer ensured that essential skills and sacred understanding would continue through future generations. Amenhotep's growing mastery of cat-related spiritual practices had earned recognition from temple authorities, who consulted him about feline behavior patterns and invited his participation in ceremonies that required deep understanding of human-cat spiritual partnerships. This recognition represented not only personal achievement, but also honor for his entire family lineage and their tradition of devoted cat guardianship. The economic aspects of maintaining proper relationships with feline guardians had evolved into a sophisticated system that balanced spiritual obligations with practical constraints while ensuring that divine protection remained accessible to families across all social levels. Cooperative arrangements between neighbors allowed sharing of resources for cat care, while temple programs provided assistance to families facing temporary difficulties that might compromise their ability to properly care for their sacred guardians. The broader social impact of widespread cat worship had created cultural innovations that influenced everything from urban planning to international diplomacy, as Egyptian cities were designed with feline needs in mind, and foreign relations often involved exchanges of specially bred cats that carried concentrated divine blessings to recipient civilizations. Amenhotep's contemplation of these vast interconnections helped him understand that his daily interactions with Meat and Tekem were part of a cosmic system that connected individual households to the divine order that governed all existence. Every moment of care, every expression of gratitude, and every recognition of their sacred nature contributed to maintaining the spiritual balance that kept Egyptian civilization prosperous and protected. The promise of eternal companionship that motivated elaborate mummification practices and afterlife preparations represented perhaps the most profound expression of interspecies love in human history, a commitment that transcended death itself and ensured that the bonds forged through shared earthly experience would continue throughout infinite time in realms of eternal abundance and perfect harmony. As he observed Meat and Tekem settling into their evening rest, their bodies relaxed, but their spiritual awareness remaining alert to protect the sleeping household, Amenhotep felt profound gratitude for the sacred partnership that had enriched his life with divine protection, spiritual meaning, and the deep contentment that came from living in harmony with creatures blessed by the gods themselves. As the years flowed past like the eternal Nile, carrying Amenhotep from youth through middle age toward the wisdom of elderhood, his relationship with Meat and Tekem and their successors had become the foundation of a spiritual practice that influenced every aspect of his existence and prepared him for the ultimate journey that awaited all mortals in the Prastit End-4 afterlife realms where perfect companionship would replace earthly limitations and sorrows. The sacred bond between Egyptians and cats had proven to be one of the most enduring and influential relationships in human history creating cultural innovations and spiritual insights that would echo through millennia long after the great temples had crumbled and the pharaohs' names had been forgotten by most of the world. Yet in the timeless realm of divine love and interspecies partnership, these connections remained as powerful and meaningful as they had been during the golden age of Egyptian civilization. Meat's transition to the afterlife had been marked by ceremonies that rivaled those held for human family members, demonstrating the genuine grief and profound love that her years of faithful service had earned from every member of the household. Her mummified form, wrapped in linen, blessed with the most powerful protective spells, and adorned with amulets crafted specifically for her individual spiritual journey, rested in the family shrine where daily offerings and prayers maintained her connection to the living world while supporting her navigation of afterlife challenges. The knowledge that Meat awaited reunion in the eternal hunting grounds provided comfort during the grief that followed her physical departure, while her spiritual presence remained tangible to family members who continued to sense her protective influence during times of danger or uncertainty. Dreams of Meat hunting in paradise marshes and sleeping peacefully in gardens of perpetual bloom reinforced Egyptian beliefs about the continuation of consciousness and love beyond the boundaries of mortal existence. Tekem had matured into a wise and powerful guardian whose supernatural abilities seemed to increase with age and experience, while her offspring, carefully bred according to sacred principles and raised with devoted attention to their spiritual development, ensured that divine protection would continue through future generations. The bloodline that connected these cats to their illustrious ancestors carried forward the concentrated divine favor that had accumulated through centuries of faithful service and proper care. Amenhotep's own children grew up understanding that their relationships with their feline guardians were among the most important spiritual practices they would ever undertake, requiring dedication, wisdom, and genuine love that would be rewarded with divine protection and eternal companionship that would sustain them through all the challenges and joys of earthly existence and beyond. The artistic traditions that had begun with simple drawings of Meat and Tekem had evolved into sophisticated works that captured not only their physical beauty, but also the spiritual essence that made them sacred partners in humanity's eternal struggle against chaos and meaninglessness. These artworks served as permanent reminders of the love and devotion that could bridge species differences and create bonds strong enough to survive death itself. The economic investments that Egyptian families made in proper cat care, high-quality food, medical attention, elaborate burials, and spiritual ceremonies represented far more than material expenses, but rather investments in spiritual security that would provide returns throughout infinite time. The divine favor earned through devoted cat guardianship was understood to be the most valuable inheritance parents could provide to their children and grandchildren. The social innovations created by universal cat worship had transformed Egyptian society in ways that made it more compassionate, more spiritually aware, and more capable of recognizing the sacred value present in all living creatures. The reverence shown to cats extended to broader environmental consciousness and respect for the natural world that supported all life along the Nile. The international influence of Egyptian cat worship had spread throughout the ancient world, carrying with it advanced concepts about animal consciousness, interspecies, communication, and the spiritual significance of caring relationships that crossed traditional boundaries between humans and other species. Foreign diplomats and traders who experienced Egyptian cat culture often returned to their homelands with adopted feline companions and modified religious practices that incorporated feline wisdom into their own spiritual traditions. The medical knowledge accumulated through centuries of careful cat observation had advanced understanding of animal health and behavior in ways that benefited both feline and human welfare. Egyptian veterinary practices were considered the most advanced in the ancient world, combining practical medical skills with spiritual healing techniques that addressed both physical symptoms and supernatural causes of illness. The architectural innovations designed to accommodate feline needs had influenced building practices throughout Egypt and beyond, creating living spaces that were more comfortable, secure, and spiritually harmonious for all inhabitants. The integration of cat-friendly features into home and temple design demonstrated how human and animal needs could be balanced to create environments that served both practical and spiritual purposes. As Amenhotep contemplated the vast legacy of human-cat partnership that had shaped his civilization and would continue to influence future generations, he felt profound appreciation for the sacred relationships that had enriched his life with meaning, protection, and unconditional love that transcended all earthly limitations and promised eternal companionship in realms of perfect harmony and infinite abundance. The setting sun painted the western sky in colours that seemed to echo the divine radiance depicted in temple art, while Tekem and her offspring settled into their evening rest with the peaceful confidence of creatures secure in their sacred purpose and cherished by the humans whose lives they protected. The day's activities had brought them all closer to understanding the timeless bonds that connected them across species boundaries, through the mysterious but powerful love that cats and humans had shared since the dawn of civilization. The gentle evening breeze carried the scent of lotus blossoms and the sound of distant temple bells that marked the end of another day blessed by divine protection and sacred companionship. In the growing darkness, the cat's glowing eyes would soon begin their eternal vigil, maintaining the watch that had protected Egyptian families for thousands of years, and would continue to guard those who honoured the sacred covenant between humans and the divine creatures who had chosen to share their lives with generous hearts and supernatural wisdom. The legacy of this ancient partnership would survive the rise and fall of empires, the changing of languages and customs, and the passage of millennia, living on in the hearts of all who recognized the sacred nature of the bond between humans and cats, a bond forged in divine love and destined to endure throughout eternity in forms that would bring joy, protection, and spiritual meaning to countless generations yet to come. Thank you for listening to our journey through ancient Egypt and the sacred bond between humans and their feline guardians. If you enjoyed this story of Meet, Tekem, and their loving family, please like and subscribe for more tales of ancient wisdom and timeless connections that continue to enrich our lives today. The love between humans and cats truly is eternal, transcending time, culture, and even death itself.